Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes, and welcome to Books My Dad, who has a PhD in English Literature, thinks I should read because reading them improves my understanding of good literature, also known as Gwen Aimlessly Chatters About Real Literature. Okay, so all of the books so far have been books by authors. You can find authors in many cases that people recognize. F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and even some of the books that you might have thought were slightly less are still by authors that, have a reputation. This next book is by an author that people haven't heard of and is a book that people haven't really heard of. This was also a book that was fundamentally not going to be something that I liked because of the nature of what it is. And the nature of what it is post-apocalyptic fiction. And the thing is, I've never liked post-apocalyptic fiction. Yes, I'm very, very shallow. We all know this. I've said this a million times. And post-apocalyptic fiction is, the dystopian thing, the everything has fallen apart thing. It's depressing, and I don't like depressing books because I'm shallow like that. So the book that I'm talking about, Pig on a Lead. And this is, among other things, a strangely written book. Now, if you're wondering about the sticker that's on the bottom left that you can see that was on the spine, this is one of those books that a library was getting rid of, in this case, the Winnipeg Public Library. Because the thing is, that's always been a very, very good way to get books for cheap. You go to a library, and a lot of libraries will have a table of books that they're not keeping on the shelves anymore, maybe because nobody takes the book out, maybe because the book is getting old and worn enough that they just don't want to deal with, having to fix the book. Anyway, so in this case, this is a book that was, as I said, it was taken off of the Winnipeg Library shelves. And this book this was published back in 1963. And as I said, it's a piece of post-apocalyptic fiction. It's set in England. And the idea is that there was, and you gather this throughout the course of the book, that there was some kind of horrifying plague that ripped through the countryside, ripped through England. We don't know about the rest of the world, but we do know that there was some kind of horrifying plague. And this book is told from the perspective of a teenage boy whose name is Danker. And Danker is a child who was born during or in the immediate aftermath of this horrifying plague. He has grown up in a post-plague world. He's grown up in a post-apocalyptic world. So he's grown up never knowing that things could be different. I mean, he's heard from the man who raised him, a man who used to be a stoker on some kind of, on some ship, whether military or otherwise. Jinkins found him and raised him, but Jinkins is clearly not particularly well educated, has also, whether in the wake of this and the chaos that followed, he is some sort of Christian fundamentalist, which isn't really very surprising because anybody who is really very religious in the wake of a massive catastrophe like this, where literally millions of people die in a horrifying way due to some sort of horrifying illness, a lot of religious people will become more religious, more strict. And Jinkins is one of the people who went that way. And he's and so the, so he raised Danker, and over time they stumbled across one other survivor, a survivor who is called Nutter. One would assume because he is a complete nutter. He's somebody who, in the wake of this disaster, didn't, become a hard Christian fundamentalist or anything else. He suffered some sort of psychotic break. Um, and this comes up later on because coming up on about halfway through the book, there's this incident where Nutter, who periodically has these phases where he turns into a psychopath and tries to kill people and tries to sexually assault Danker and things like that, but, well, let's be honest, he probably is actively trying to rape him. But the thing is that it's clear that the whole thing just completely unhinged him, and partway through this book, he enters this strange fugue state where he reverts, in a lot of ways, mentally to whoever he was before this crisis. And who he was before this crisis, it's implicit that he was a pastor or a priest of some kind before the crisis, because he starts speaking in a careful and formal, educated way, and is able to recite parts of the Bible backwards and forwards. And so, and upon upon sort of coming back to himself, he has amnesia, but he is now acting as he probably did before this crisis. But again, by the end of the book, it's clear that this whole thing, his mind is just shot because he saw so many horrific things, and he couldn't, in effect, um, he couldn't resolve within himself the internal conflict of God is good and kind and so many other things, followed up by seeing so much horror and so much death in this wave of whatever the plague was that decimated the countryside. The title comes from the fact that Danker finds a pig, and the pig is, there are so few living things left except rats that finding a pig is just an amazing revelation. And he brings the pig back to Jinkins, and Jinkins reacts to this the way those of us from a pre-apocalyptic world might react in such a situation. He says, "Oh my God, you found a pig. We can have pork chops and bacon." The problem is that he's been raising Danker on a very steady diet of the Bible, of the old school Bible, of the Old Testament. The Old Testament, which among other things declares pigs to be unclean, which among other things means that you don't slaughter a pig for meat because you don't eat pig meat. Now, Danker, of course, eating food out of tins, doesn't realize that ham is pig meat. All of this tinned ham that they've been surviving off of, finding tins of food floating around in various places left behind by various dead people, and he doesn't know that ham is pig meat, and Jinkins has apparently not actually enlightened him very much. One suspects because A, Jinkins probably wasn't all that educated before the apocalypse, and B, because Jinkins probably also suffered a massive psychotic break following this plague. But Danker, having been raised on this steady diet of the Bible, says, "But we can't kill the pig, Jinkins. It's a pig, and pigs are unclean for eating. And anyways, this pig came swimming out of the ocean. God clearly created a pig in the ocean and sent it out." So Danker insists on dragging this pig everywhere with them. And the thing is that, so this is just the setup, but by the end of the book, we have this horrific, we have this horrific final denouement where Nutter reverts back to how he was at the beginning of the book and murders Jinkins, but Jinkins manages to kill him first, and these two men who have basically been the only people Danker has known through his whole life kill each other. Jinkins to protect Danker, and Nutter because he's lost his mind, leaving Danker alone with this woman, Jillian. And the thing about Jillian is Jillian has also suffered a psychotic break because she's absolutely convinced that there are totally people down at the George. There's an inn just a little down the ways. Of course people are there, and everybody comes to vacation all the time, because she's gone into denial about everything that happened, and she's mentally in pieces. But the part of this book that my father, who is after all the reason why I'm reading this, the part of this book that is so interesting is that this book alternates in how it's written, because you have this boy who was raised by an ill-educated, guy who used to, what feels like a million years ago, used to work in the bowels of a ship shoveling coal, stoking an engine. He's a stoker. And he's been raised by this guy, and he's been raised with him and alternating between him and reading the Bible, and it goes back and forth between styles of speech and styles of writing. Hear what say, stick all bloody pair you in before us stop, hear me? And when I answered him not, and he saw that I had compassion on Nutter, he gave me hard blows, and I fell beneath his feet, and had much pain. Think us brought you up what did learn you all times so as do that a dirty poof all years what learn up all times read things look along so get stuff a poof, hear me? Well, when you was kiddin' us got chew up all grub all times, don't us? So you like what God want, don't it? And you here now, not dead the rest here, like he say, hear me? Here, don't it? And so it goes back and forth. Therefore I washed the blood from Nutter's eyes, and his beard I bathed clean also, and the spirit stung him so that he groaned, yet he would not awaken. And this was ever so with Nutter, but was his sickness, and not the distemper, for he bore no mark of God's anger on his soft flesh. It's very, very strange the way this is written. It gives you literary whiplash as you read it, as you alternate between this barely comprehensible speech of somebody who has no education, who's, as I said, probably suffered a psychotic break of some kind, and this pseudo-biblical style of talking, because you've got this perspective of this kid who's been raised with this kind of verbal whiplash. And so it's a very, very strange book. And it's strange in its writing, and all post-apocalyptic stuff is fundamentally strange in its way, but you also have these three strange characters because, as I said, you've got two guys who've had psychotic breaks of various kinds, and this kid who's been raised by them. And so Danker's perspective is very, very weird because it's so religious, and yet it's so twisted by what the world is. If you like really, really weird post-apocalyptic stuff, go ahead and read it, but, man, is this weird. So, I think that's it for my 15 minutes on this. See you all next week.